Okay, so welcome again to the Courageous Conversations, the Communicating with Care online training. Who is this training for? This training is for the managers who have to manage delicate conversations at work, and typically they are about mental health, performance, or diversity. For the purpose of this training, I think an examples I will most likely be giving on the mental health, because I know that's the topic that most of you, many of you will have to face, or is already facing. So I know that's a topic that is of the biggest interest. However, the model I will be discussing today with you is universal in its nature. So you could apply it to different scenarios, but most likely I'll be focusing on the mental health. Also, this training is for managers who want to communicate with the employees effectively, understanding them and taking the perspective into account. And the way I'm thinking about it is about managers who want to lead with the heart and the head. If you watched my videos that were leading towards this event today, I talked in that video about the balancing act and the balancing challenge that many managers have to face when it comes to supporting employees. You know, what's the balance between doing the right thing to the employee, and then what's the right thing to do, what's right for the manager, or what's right for the organization. So that's why I am calling this managing with the heart and head. That's what I mean. And I'm going to go into it as we are going to more detail. Next, it's for the managers who want to drive inclusion in the team. But it can also be relevant for HR professionals, especially if you are in your HR advisory role, when you're exposed to this kind of situations, or when you're new to it. Hopefully my perspective will be something you will be benefiting from as well. And also maybe not so much directly, but you could, if you're an employee who would like to explore how they can communicate about their needs and situation, perhaps about their own mental health or their own diversity, this is a module that could be very useful to you as well. However, throughout the training, I will be mainly referring this as to the managers. So hopefully some of you will relate to it already and will be able to relate. Okay, if you stay until the end, as I said, you will receive the PDF handout of this training by email, and you will also receive the link to the playout. But I would still encourage you to stay live, because this is a great opportunity to ask any questions and take the opportunity of this event being live. So if you would like to ask any question, just put it in the comment sections and I will review at the end of this presentation. I have also prepared something special for you, but as I said before, I want you to take as much as possible. So let's move on. Why this training is different to other trainings that you might have attended. So whilst this is about communicating with care, and one of the topics is mental health, I won't be focusing actually at all on the process, on the HR procedures that are required. Of course, they are very important, and I would always tell you to check with your HR, check with your policies, what's the right thing to do from that point of view. But I am hoping to add more to it, more perspectives on how to manage those situations from the cultural point of view, from the human point of view, and from the kind of leadership point of view that is in line with being inclusive, being diverse, but also managing with heart and head. So that's going to be my focus. Also, I am talking through my practice. I've been doing this for 10 years. I have experience. I've learned, the hard way myself, and I have had direct involvement in those situations. So it's not something that I've only read books about, but I have read the books about those things as well. And I've actually had the chance to apply that knowledge into practice. And actually, I will be talking about one of the models that I've learned from the books, but apply into practice that proved to be very successful. And also the recommendations. I wanted to show you my recommendations I've received on LinkedIn, not to show off about me and to brag about me, but I thought that those recommendations are showing the results I'm delivering. And I'm delivering those results through my approach that I've been applying for over the 10 years of me working in HR. So if you can resonate with any of those things, especially those that I've highlighted in red, that means that this training is right for you too. So one of the recommendations says that I'm leaving the company with a positive culture. I'm, honesty, self-awareness, extensive domain knowledge and experience, and all around people focus was making the difference. So it's again this balancing act, I would say. Another one said, Anna has helped embedded a culture of inclusion and innovation. Anna is not afraid to challenge others to see things differently, because that's what I'm going to be encouraging you to do today as well, taking perspective and taking ownership. In here it says push their own development. Yeah, I was definitely pushing people for their own development as well as mine. I'm really that's something at the core of how I do things. Another one is saying, I've noticed a difference in how I handle situations. So whatever I'm doing, the interactions I'm having is causing people to change the outcome. And that's so super important to me, making me think about situations still from my perspective. That's probably worth commenting on as well for a second, because having worked with many managers over those 10 years, I know managers, as everybody else, people, and they have different skills, different values, different expectations, and different leadership styles. Some are more introverted, some are more extroverted, and so on. But in this training, I won't be telling you the one and only way of being a leader is this. You have to be behaving always like that or behaving always like that. I'm really caring about you being able to adapt to the situation. So yes, there's going to be an element of flexibility and adaptability, but without losing who you are and what you stand for. And again, fairness, equality, people person, and to make a difference in your team. So if any of those things resonate with you, I've achieved those outcomes by applying the CARE model. And the CARE model as well is different in the sense of it comes from my practice, from my knowledge, from my passion, and it basically worked most of the times. Okay, so I don't want to brag about myself too many times, but I know I'm very new to many of you. So as I said, I've worked 10 years in the UK, so I have UK HR experience. As you may notice from my accent, I'm not from the UK, I'm from Poland. I've worked for 4 different brands as HR, and had my own company before, of course, culture communication. I am certified business coach. I've got a master in sociology. And I think that matters in the sociology helped me really be that observant, having that mindset of looking at our environment from the as a researcher, I would say, as a scientist, and apply that into what we do in practice. So I love my sociology studies. I love them to bits, but the part I enjoyed most was the practical part. I wasn't so much into theory. I was very much into how I can apply theory into theory into practice. So if that resonates with you, I think you're going to find this training relevant and interesting. So moving on, having worked, as I said, with many managers on employee relations, I've discovered the following, and see again if you can relate to any of that. So the most difficult conversations turn not to be as difficult as they may seem at first. Of course, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily easy, but they are not as scary. What one person means to be difficult conversation is different to another. And so I've seen that many times. And it comes with experience. It comes with exposure. So it's one of those things that works for any other aspect of our life. Opening conversations opens new solutions and opportunities. So if we are worried about those conversations, really by opening them up, we are opening new opportunities. Another one which I think is quite important to reflect on is that the good outcome for both, so for employee and manager, may also include a contract termination. I know, it sounds weird, isn't it? But what I am going to present you is about the process, is about the mindset, is about the culture. So we can still arrive to a contract termination, and I've been in those situations, unfortunately, before, as well. But because of the way we've approached the whole process, obviously following the formal process, that's very important. Make sure you check with your HR. Don't terminate anyone's contract because of this training, please. But what I mean by that is, for example, we had a long-term sickness case, and it sounds awful, I know, but we were helping an employee who was on the 12 months long-term sickness. And because we had those open conversations, because we were applying the care model, so we were seeing what's realistic, we are evaluating the progress together, we were agreeing on the next steps, the employee was involved they knew what to expect, and so on. We arrived to the conclusion that staying in employment was just not the right thing to do, and it was actually causing more harm, because the employee was kind of holding into that thought that there's this job, the job was causing them stress. They were not off sick because of the work, but coming to the role they were doing was just too much for them and too overwhelming. So it was just causing more stress, and they couldn't focus on the more feasible aspects of what they could be doing instead. So we've terminated the contract, but it went in such a different way, and it felt so much, and it was the right thing to do, and everyone agreed to that. So if we can arrive to that conclusion together, it is a good outcome. It's about how. Managers often know the answer, just need a little bit of reassurance. This is definitely coming from my HR experience. As I said, I've had lots of managers coming to me, and I'm the kind of person who you probably, hopefully by now, you're not surprised that I love working with the managers. I mean, sometimes it's just sense checking, and sometimes it's just about discussing things through and getting that reassurance. I have to just, as well, add on this note, the benefit that HR has is that we are exposed to different scenarios and different situations, and we have that almost holistic or more complex overview of how those things are happening. So very often for us, obviously depending on the experience, these are not the first time we are facing situations like that. So we are growing in our confidence very often. Next, it is better to be honest with an employee than prolong, sugarcoat, avoid. Formal letters are digested better if they are being verbally anticipated first. That actually helps a lot. There are more grays than blacks and whites, although I've worked, I just want to mention that I've worked, I was on a maternity cover contract as a HR in a factory environment. And did I learn something about black and white? Absolutely, because wherever you have the safety considerations for your end user and customer, I was in a factory that was producing food. There is no grace very often, not to mention that there are cameras everywhere and you can't hide away from different situations, but sometimes you have to be black and white, and that is the right thing to do as well. But actually, when the situation is black and white, it's easier. It's just easier when an employee, for example, has been conducting gross misconduct. Actually, they are actually easier situations to handle than others because it's black and white. But usually, and especially in the context that I'm talking here about, it's about the grays that we're going to be targeting. We are helping employees when we are helping them face the reality to its full extent, and taking care of others starts with taking care of self. I'm going to talk about 7 mistakes. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it now. So as I said, I've done a lot of things well, and I'm happy and proud to say it this way, but as well, I've done a lot of things wrong. So I've been discovering all this walking on a slack line. You may go through a much more solid road. What do I mean by that? You know, especially in the early days, but not only, to be fair, because every situation brings you new angle, new perspective, and something maybe you have not been exposed to before. But it felt like walking on that slack line when you had to balance, and you were not sure if this is the right thing to do. Is this the right thing to say? Am I making the right decision? Am I advising in the correct way to the manager? It felt not steady. Focusing on the pain to go away or the challenge to go away rather than what's actually feasible. And I said stand-alone role here because I've once worked in HR. My first role in HR was a stand-alone role. And I have to say, I remember very well, it was in my first probably 3 months into the role or something like that, I had a senior manager coming crying into my room. That was a small company, so HR had its own office. So basically, that senior manager came crying and complaining about another senior manager. They basically argued about something, and basically I've heard all bad stuff about that other manager. And I have to say, that's the next point, taking compassionate side. I basically immediately thought, yes, she's right, he's wrong. I have to fix it. I have to stop her crying. I have to make her feel better. And I was just like a headless chicken. I actually even had an idea to go to that other manager and ask him to apologize her, but that was luckily my manager at that time, she was a general manager, was definitely more experienced than I was. She knew what to do. Basically said, "No, just calm her down, say not my time to talk about it. Let's come back to the conversation tomorrow." But yes, I have fallen into those things. I was torn between legal and human side of the case, and especially if you are working with the employment law specialist, they just gonna tell you prepare you for the worst case scenario, and they gonna throw at you all the possible letters with every detail there that's gonna be a little bit discouraging at times. So it's about balancing that advice as well. Of course, it's very valid, and we need to follow the advice, but after a few cases, especially in my early days, I've learned how to work with the legal team, and I basically said, that's very interesting. What would you say if we did this instead? So basically, rather than asking them advice, I would start proposing my own solutions and sense checking that with them and tweaking accordingly. So that was my lesson, and how to let managers go to do it. Should I be putting it in here? I do trust my managers. I have to say, because working in HR, like in-house HR, you usually know the managers, and you know who you can just let go, and you know who needs more time. But what I've learned as well is that this lesson is their lesson, and me protecting them and overprotecting or overthinking it's not helpful for anybody else. And I'm going to talk about the principles of how to communicate with care that is taking care of that side of me walking on a slack line. So I have learned that too. Okay, so what are the 7 common mistakes when you're communicating with care? This is for one side of the coin. I am not tackling here the 7 common mistakes when you are overdoing it the other way around. So when you are only focusing on the process, when you're only focusing on the task or goal. This is about when you are caring a little bit, when you're taking that caring literally. So number 1, let's see if you can relate. By the way, in your notebooks, I've sent you the PDF. You can be taking notes and see if you can mark which one you can relate to. So number 1, too involved. So too involved is when you are basically seeing that the situation with your employee is starting taking a toll on yourself too. When you are starting actually sleeping worse, for example, or worrying very much about it, this is a sign that you are getting too involved and that this is the time to set boundaries. Number 2, the role misconception. This is when you as a manager, you are thinking that, as I mentioned, it does stand as a long role. When you're thinking that your role is to fix it, to make the pain go away, to find a solution. Now, your role is, when they are crying, it's to show empathy and just say, I understand this is difficult, right? And give them that space. You don't have to say it's going to be better. You don't have to come up with, I've been there before. You actually, in that most vulnerable time, you can just say, I understand, and just be with them in that moment. Your role is to help them see things through longer term, support them, but also figure it out together how you can progress longer term. And we're going to talk about it later. The fixer, it's the one I've mentioned as well, is the one that wants to find solutions straight away. Assumptions. This is when you are making assumptions about one's capabilities, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, without asking them actually and having that caring conversation. A classic example, I would say, is when you have a mother or parent just returning from maternity leave or paternity leave, and you're just assuming that because they are parents with a newborn at home, not newborn, 1 year old, 1 year old at home, basically a toddler at home, they won't want to be involved in that bigger project, or that they won't be interested in the promotion, or they don't want to be interested in taking more responsibilities, and you're just taking this away from them because you care. Don't do that. Number 5, taking too much on yourself. This is when you basically are taking too much on yourself because you want to help and you don't communicate with care about the employees what to do. Number 6, caring more than an employee. So this one is I'll give you an example. Whenever you think something like, if only this I would like to promote this person, if only they got involved in that project, if only they changed their attitude, if only they were more reliable with the deadlines, right? No, I would say this to you. After you have explored all the options, put everything on the table, had this caring conversation, if you're not getting in that sense what you need, this is when you have to say to yourself, there's only so much I can do and I should do. And also often, if you are caring more than an employee, it means that very often that you care about different things or you are in different contexts. Obviously, I'm not talking here about things like clinical depression or anything of that kind. That's a completely different matter. Okay, and number 7, not communicating. Obviously, this is happening when you are not communicating with the employee. And that's about the problem and challenges, and you're avoiding that. Okay, my results and approach are not typical in the sense of, as I mentioned before, this is not only about the HR process, but what I will be encouraging you today is to focus on improving, on thinking, on taking the context into account and caring. So playing with all those 3 elements. Okay, let's move on to the core of the training today. 4 steps to communicate with care. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here on that one now. So order of the steps will be context dependent. And the steps are to communicate, to agree, to realize, and to evaluate. So what do I mean by order of the steps will be context dependent? I will give you an example. One example will be when you communicate. One example will be on when you are, for example, an employee has told you that they have ADHD. So all you have to do is realize what's ADHD, agree for a meeting with the employee to communicate the needs and the expectations, basically pretty much ask them how the situation is from their point of view. Then you're going to agree, and you can do it even in the same meeting. You can agree on the specifics of how you're going to progress and how you're going to work together, bearing in mind the condition. And then you may agree that weekly or bi-weekly or whatever time scale that's going to be most relevant to you, that you're going to evaluate the progress and basically what's working, what approach works and what doesn't work. And you know, it can be as simple as you just, with those 4 steps, happy that the employee had a chance to communicate and to propose their own solutions and to present their point of view. You had a chance to understand and to realize the challenges. You could agree together. That's a very important time. There's not a very important thing that you just don't assume and jump into those things, and that you evaluate together. One note as well on this note, the realized part is things like neurodiversity, for example, so autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and so on, but also with any other condition. I know I've noticed that employees appreciate when manager takes, at least 5 minutes of the time, maybe 10, that they do a little bit of a research of what the condition is and what's involved, and they can demonstrate then that they've done so. Basically, I've read this page on NHS And that's what they've learned that's interesting. Really, that is showing your empathy, that is showing that you are listening and that you are building trust and that you are not dismissing the condition. And that's, that's one hint I can give you that may work. Like I will give you more hints, but one hint now I can give you that works magic in those situations. So that's a very simple example. Another example when it can be more complicated and you can be jumping from one to another is a mental health condition. So it's going to be more difficult to start with because an employee won't be disclosing with you the challenges, but you will start with realize, you will observe, or you will notice that the employee in a meeting, for example, is less attentive than they used to be, that they are not contributing to the meeting in the way they used to do, that they are not answering the question in the level of detail, or that they are not asking the questions. And whereas before you would know that they would be asking the questions. And plus the nonverbal body language, even if it's a Zoom call, you would notice that there is something not quite right. So you are realizing there's something not quite right. So what do? You have to communicate that with the employee. Well, you have to. I would encourage you to do so. So you go into communicating. One way of doing that is as simple as a meeting with employee and saying, look, I've noticed that. And you're just listing what you have noticed. This is a non-judgmental, not defensive way of communicating. Employee is just aware that you are paying notice, and it's a good sign that you care. So you are realizing that's the so you can start communication. If employee opens up, they may start telling you little things like, yes, it's been challenging recently because I had this personal situation. In fact, probably I'm a little bit more down. I haven't been thinking about it myself. And you may actually agree that the employee will take time, maybe contact the GP to see what's going on. So you have to postpone it. Then you're going to have another meeting to see what's happened since. Maybe GP has given them a medication, or maybe has signposted them to some other situations, and you have to talk about this again. Context dependent, it may be that you will agree that for the next 2 weeks, the employee will just focus on the 2 or 3 tasks or goals, but then the pressure is going to take off of them, and they will be able to take care of the home situations, and you're going to come back again and communicate and evaluate what's working or what is not working. So there's maybe way more going back and forwards if you'd like, but it's not going to be literally going back and forwards, because if you agree together, if you realize what resources you have as well, and if you are going to be evaluating the progress, you are going to be moving ahead. One of the big challenges with mental health is that you don't have often the timescales of what you're working with. So let's compare it with broken leg. If you have broken your leg, I hope you don't, but if someone breaks the leg, the timescales are very well defined. You are going to be in your plaster for 4 weeks, and then following 3 weeks or whatever, you're going to be going through the rehabilitation. So in the next possible 2 months, the employee will be, reduced mobility, and there will be specific implications into how they can work, into their home working equipment, and so on and so on and so on. So you have specific timeline where you can work towards. You can still obviously use this model. You can agree what's feasible, what's not feasible, evaluate, and you can assume that in 2 months' time, employee will be fully functioning the way they were before. With mental health, it's often not the case, and you have to take it day by day, week by week, month by month. Is very much context dependent. So I've seen, for example, situations where maybe like bereavement situations or things like that, when the timescales, we are talking about 3 months, returning to more functionality, and there are conditions that are lifelong conditions, and they're going to have ups and downs, and ideally context dependent and what's feasible. And manager and employee can actually find a rhythm around that, and they will know when they can dial up and when they have to dial down. So the situations are very, very different. But I wanted to draw your attention that these are the kind of your working blocks you will be working with context dependent. So if you were expecting a process of step 1, step 3, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and so on, that's not the case, because we are dealing with people, and people have different variables to them, and we are different as managers as well. I know it sounds like a cliche, it probably is, but it's worth repeating, I think. Okay, let's move on now to each of the elements. Communicate. So how to communicate? The questions that are often asked are the following: how to talk with my employee about the mental health, right? How do we open up those conversations? Similar with how to ask, it should be how to ask about the diversity. What if I make it worse? What's the right thing to say? How to address performance issues? What if I say something wrong? So these are the questions that you may come across, or maybe perhaps you were asking yourself, and perhaps you were relating yourself to them. So what to do? These are the following options you can, I would suggest as an answer. So step 1, prepare yourself mentally for the conversation. Use those 4 principle guides to guide you and prepare. So what are the 4 principles? Number 1, if you care, it shows, show up. So Sandy Petland has come with a term, done the research at time of the research of honest signal, which basically means that if we are honest, people subconsciously will pick up on that. And this is one of my key questions I would ask: do you care? If you care, go and show up, you will be fine. When you're there, be fully there. So it's about being present, listening, and being there for the other person, not communicating the problem, create the problem, and build bond with boundaries. So boundaries are very important, and I've mentioned them before as well. And I'm going to talk about them later. And another thing you could sense check your questions with is, what if I say something wrong? So my question to that always is, do you care about the person outcome? Because if you care, even if you say something wrong, the person in front of you, 99% of the times, or 90% of the times, will get it that you're carrying and you're just trying. What if I want to know what to say? Again, if you know why you are there to talk, so that realized part is very helpful, then you will know how to get a conversation. Should I be addressing this problem? My magic question is, what happens if you do not address it? So if you don't address it, it's not going to get better, is it? So that's one of those. And what's my role in it? What can you realistically control would be my question. Because what your role to do in it isn't about solving the person's situations in the personal life, but you can focus on what you can control, and what you can control is within the role and the workplace. So this is where the focus should go. Okay, communicate. How to start the conversation. So I know that that's something difficult. You know, one thing is being in the conversation, but how do we get to that conversation? So we could use those examples. One that I've already mentioned, I've noticed that you, and describe what, how about we have a chat? Is today at 3 o'clock fine with you? And so on. And then another one might be, I'd like to have a conversation about something that is a bit delicate to talk about. It may take 30 minutes or so. When could we talk about it? So it's about the project that I know we both care about, and so on. So you're going to have those questions in your handouts. And I wanted to share with you as well, because obviously we can't go to every single detail in the time we have, but if you were to go away with 2 models today, it's the care model and the core model. The core model is by Jan Hills from Head, Heart, Brain, and I'm going to link you to her resources, but her website is fantastic. She's looking at the work and the business from the neuroscience point of view, so that's why it works. And have a look at her website. The resources are great. I've discovered the core model when I was still in my stand-alone role. The first book Jan Hills written was The Brain Savvy HR, so that was specifically for HR people, but since she also written more books about women and the business and so on. But the model is very helpful, and I've used that in those conversations, and I've used that model in designing HR products, and so on. So the models have 4 elements again to it. It's about certainty, options, reputations, and equity. So this is about how our brain responds to situations, and it can be either with the sense of threat or with the sense of reward if it addresses one of those 4 elements. And if you have a look at those 4 elements, the workplace is full of potential danger of responding with a sense of threat. So we have certainty, options, reputations, equity. The employees in the mental health, for example, context, may struggle with the sense of threat to the reputation and the equity. They don't always want to disclose what's on the minds or the situations because of the sense of threat to the reputation or the equity. So if we use certainty by discussing with them why we want to discuss, what are the possible impacts, how are they being appreciated, and so on, we are reducing that sense of threat and increasing the sense of reward. A very important one is the option. So if we are linking that back to the agree part, it's really, really important that we just don't jump into solution, that we're not the fixer, that we sit together and we figure it out together and give as many options as possible. Maybe not too many, but the bottom line here is that things are not imposed on the employees, but they have a sense of options. So whenever you have to enter that kind of dialogue, that kind of conversation, bear in mind those 4 elements and think if there is a potential risk to a sense of threat or a sense of reward. I'm just going to give you an example of the certainty, how to use certainty and the reputation and all those 4 elements when you are preparing an employee for a conversation. And I'm going to give you an example on the mediation. I'm not saying you should be doing mediation, it is a skill in itself, but I thought it would be a good context to show you how it applies into a real life scenario. So when I was in a situation, and I was in different organizations and different levels of hierarchy and so on involved with, so I would start with one-to-one with each of the employees. And by the way, I would do it face-to-face when I could, but I also done it by phone when the employee were in a completely different location and was just not logistically valuable for me to be traveling back and forwards. So we would do it over the phone as well. So it's possible. So I would first talk with every of the employees separately, and I would just be listening to them, and that would give them the space to feel secured from their reputation point of view and a sense of equity, and I would give them as much certainty as possible into why I'm here, what they can expect, how the conversation is gonna look like. That there's going to be no notes taking. So that's again the sense of reputations to be protected. Is that we are there to help them see things from different perspectives. That it happened before, it happens every day in the workplace scenarios. So that's the sense of equity and the reputation. You're not unique. You're not the trouble child. This is normal. We're just trying to figure it out together. Giving them options. Would you like to talk on Tuesday, on Thursday? What time of the day? How would you like me to start this conversation, and so on. So when we were entering the conversations, they knew why we were there. They knew how it's gonna look like. They knew possible consequences. So I would say, look, this is not gonna, there will be no notes on any employee file, but on the employee file, there's just gonna be that we have had this conversation, but with no details on it, and so on, and so on, and so on. That model, and I literally used that model. I literally, when I was preparing for this conversation, was thinking about those 4 elements, and I was always successful with my approach there, even with those employees who did not want to have this mediation done in the first place, which is very often the case. So that's a very powerful model. I would encourage you to have a look at that. Realize 3 things broadly to think about. First is the bias, your own bias. So David Brock said, if you have a brain, you are biased. It's just something we do have, but let's not think that because we are all biased, we don't have to do anything about it. The best thing you can do about it, something about it, is to stop and think and check in with yourself. Am I being biased? Am I reacting this way because I don't know, am I reacting this way because the employee is lazy and I just think they are lazy, or am I just being biased because against them, and so on. So this is very important. The next one is the context. So what's feasible? What are the priorities? What is the impact on the team, on the organization? The same case, the same employee put in a different context, the situation will be dealt with differently. The easiest example I can give you is an employee who is disabled and needs to use wheelchair. If there's a big organization with big funds, lots of resources that have done a lot of work in that space before, it would be very reasonable to expect them that they would be investing in the workplace adjustments. For a small organization that are just basically surviving month by month, shall I say, it's not going to be reasonable, and you will have to dealing with this in a different way. Same goes for mental health. Some companies, some teams, some roles better suited to help in a much more efficient way than others. And sometimes that realization that in this context it's not going to work out, and this is why is a good outcome. And then resources. What are internal and external resources you and your employee have access to? Again, with the mental health, there are lots of resources. Organizations very often have employee assistance programs like LifeWorks, Unium, Occupational Health. They also have employee resource group for mental health, workbooks, online training, lots, and mental health first aiders. There are lots of resources that you may not even be aware of. So that's really worth checking your intranet and seeing what's available out there. Obviously, there are great organizations like Mind. If you're a manager who has to manage mental health situations at work, Mind has great guides to how to do it, what to consider, and as ACAS, I think ACAS with CAPD as well prepared a resource like that. So I'm going to link that to your PDF that you're going to receive, so you will be able to access that resource if you haven't so yet. Okay, I feel like I need tea. I'm always drinking tea, black tea, by the way. That's me being Polish. Okay, but no, okay, let's not go there. Okay, bias. I'm not going to be dwelling on it, but as we are in the acronym models today, I felt like I had to share this model with you. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but check it out. It's worth checking out if you're interested in the bias topic. One type of bias I would point your attention to is the similarity. So basically, we like what's familiar. So if the more an employee is similar to you in the way they talk, in the values, in the work, in the approach to work, in the background, the more likely you're going to like them, be positively biased against. So it's very important to hold that thought and review if you perhaps are not being biased because someone's just not so similar to you. It's normal, but it doesn't mean that we don't have to stop and reflect on that. Okay, agree. We're almost there. Agree. There are three, let's say, main areas that you can agree on. One is the adjustment. So I don't know how familiar you are with HR terms, but there is a legal term, reasonable adjustments. The word reasonable is the one, as I've mentioned, to be guided by, and the reasonable adjustments are any accommodations you're doing for employee to help them with the situation. Accountabilities, I think it's really important that we agree on those accountabilities. What are the roles and responsibilities, defined form of support and resources, who's going to be doing what, why, and how. Obviously, that has to be appropriate to the context. And then the boundaries. The boundaries are important again, and I know I keep saying that, and I don't want you to think that we always have to set the boundaries, but especially with the mental health, or especially when an employee is going through a difficult time and you know you're more prone to be very sympathetic with them. I unfortunately see in situations when the employees started texting the managers at night or during the weekends, or they were asking them very difficult questions via texts or so on that was just not right was just not healthy. And managers, as I would say again, what your role is to take care of what you can control, and you can control areas in the workplace. What we would do with those situations, we would check in with the employee and appreciate the challenge and that they are feeling open to discuss. But it has an impact, and a manager can't really help in those situations. And we would say, who is the person in your closest environment that you could refer to? What about your GP? You have employee assistance program as well. We're not doing this because we don't want to deal with you. It's because we can't help you, and there are resources and there are ways to do it. Brené Brown, of course, we have to talk about Brené Brown when we're talking about this topic, talks about boundaries, and she says basically about to agree what's okay and what's not okay. Right, evaluate. Evaluate is the last element, and it's basically as simple as agreeing in an agreed time frame, evaluate what works, what doesn't work. And there's a very simple model you can use, which is called stop, start, continue. If you are from tech world or you're familiar with Agile, you will know that this is an example of retrospective, and this is a very simple but yet very powerful tool to use to evaluate the progress. So you may basically sit down together and say, what can you stop doing, when you can start doing, and when you can continue doing. So if you have agreed, for example, that within 1 week time, if for example, if there was an ADHD case, you would say that an employee would be delivering the content 1 day before the deadline, and has this worked or not, and if that worked, why yes or why not. So you would stop prioritizing this part of task, but next time you would start prioritizing the second part of the task, but you would continue using your manager as a sounding board, for example. It's just something I thought of quickly. Okay, how are we getting on? Hopefully you have found it useful. We're almost at the end of that. I've tried, as I said, to crumble as much content as possible, and you will receive the PDF as well. And I hope you did find it useful.